Hey everyone, Tan here. 2025 is the year Wayland came of age, and this video will change how you think about the Linux desktop's future. We'll explore the Wayland transition, covering architecture changes, real-world impacts, troubleshooting, migration strategies, and whether you should switch now. In 2022, I was cautious about Wayland due to rough edges and inconsistent performance. But in 2025, major distributions have made it default, and the application ecosystem has matured. We'll discuss the effects on casual users, gamers, developers, and enterprise environments, as well as a compatibility reality check with XWayland. Plus, I'll provide a troubleshooting and migration guide, testing strategies, and my personal evaluation steps. Stick around for predictions about the future of the Linux desktop. By the end, you'll be equipped to make an informed decision about Wayland. Wayland is a modern display server protocol designed to replace the outdated X11 system, which has been patched for over 40 years. X11's architecture is complex, involving multiple layers that add latency and potential failures. In contrast, Wayland simplifies this by having applications communicate directly with the compositor, reducing steps from 6 to 3. This leads to significant benefits: improved performance with reduced latency for smoother animations, enhanced security by isolating applications from each other, and support for modern features like HDR content and fractional scaling. Additionally, Wayland generally uses less CPU and memory, making it more efficient, especially on older hardware. Although it took time to develop, due to the complexity of replacing a foundational technology, the advantages of Wayland are evident in 2025. 2025 marked a pivotal year for Wayland adoption, with major distributions like Ubuntu and Fedora fully embracing it. Ubuntu 24.10 aims to default to Wayland even for NVIDIA users, while Debian and Arch Linux have also seen significant adoption. Desktop environments have evolved, with GNOME and KDE Plasma 6 achieving stability and feature parity with X11. Budgie's upcoming version will be Wayland only. Key breakthroughs included HDR and color management support, gaming advancements with Wine's native Wayland support, and a critical mass of applications adopting Wayland. NVIDIA's driver improvements and resolved color management issues removed significant barriers to adoption. Even Raspberry Pi OS switched to Wayland, emphasizing its efficiency. The question now is not if Wayland will replace X11, but how quickly this will happen. Let's start with casual users, people who use Linux for web browsing, office work, media consumption, and general desktop tasks. If this describes you, I have good news. Wayland is probably better for you right now, and you might not even notice the transition. The benefits for casual users are immediate and obvious: smoother scrolling in web browsers, better video playback, no screen tearing when watching movies or YouTube videos, fractional scaling that actually works properly. If you have a high DPI monitor, this alone might be worth the switch. I've been tracking user reports throughout 2025, and the feedback from casual users has been overwhelmingly positive. One user told me they could finally play Divinity Original Sin 2 on medium settings with Wayland when they could barely run it on minimum settings with X11. Another said the difference in desktop responsiveness was like upgrading to an SSD all over again. The challenges for casual users are minimal but worth mentioning. Some applications might behave slightly differently. A few older applications might need XWayland Compatibility mode. But here's the thing: most casual users won't even notice these differences because the applications they use daily, Firefox, Chrome, LibreOffice, VLC, file managers, all work perfectly on Wayland. The real game changer for Wayland gaming is GameScope. This is a micro compositor specifically designed for gaming. It can run games in a contained environment with features like upscaling, HDR tone mapping, and frame rate limiting. Multiple users have told me GameScope made their Linux gaming experience significantly better. Hardware makes a huge difference here. AMD and Intel users generally have excellent Wayland gaming experiences. NVIDIA users have seen massive improvements in 2025, but there can still be edge cases. If you're on NVIDIA, definitely test of X11 and Wayland with your specific games. Here's my practical advice for gamers: test both environments with your actual game library. Don't rely on benchmarks or other people's experiences. Hardware configurations and game preferences vary too much. Set up both X11 and Wayland sessions, spend a week with each, and use whichever gives you better performance and stability. One more thing: if you're into competitive gaming where every millisecond matters, Wayland's lower input latency might give you a slight edge. It's not huge, but it's measurable. Now we get to the group that's been most resistant to Wayland adoption: developers and power users. And honestly, I understand why. Wayland breaks a lot of workflows that power users have relied on for years. Let's be direct about what doesn't work anymore. Xkill, gone. you'll need to use your compositor's force quit functionality instead. XRander for display management, replaced by compositor-specific tools, or WLR Rander for WL roots-based compositors. Xclip and XL for clipboard management, replaced by WL copy and WL paste. Xprop for window information. You'll need compositor-specific alternatives. This workflow disruption is real, and it's the biggest barrier to adoption for power users. If your daily workflow depends on X11-specific tools, the transition requires learning new tools and potentially rewriting scripts. But here's what I've learned from developers who have made the switch. The initial pain is worth it. The development experience on Wayland is actually better in many ways. Better security isolation means you can run untrusted code with more confidence. Better multi-monitor support means your IDE can span displays properly. And the overall system stability improvements mean fewer crashes and interruptions. JetBrains added Wayland support to their IDEs in 2024.2. VS Code has had solid Wayland support for a while. Most terminal emulators work perfectly. The development toolchain itself isn't the problem. It's the peripheral tools and scripts that need updating. My advice for developers is to approach this as a gradual migration. Don't try to switch everything at once. Start by identifying your X11 dependencies, find Wayland alternatives, and test them in a Wayland session. Keep your X11 session available as a fallback while you adapt your workflow. For power users who rely heavily on window management automation, this is probably the biggest adjustment. Wayland's security model prevents applications from controlling other applications the way they could in X11. This is a feature, not a bug, but it does break some workflows. The upside is that Wayland's cleaner architecture makes it easier to develop new tools. The window manager and compositor integration is much cleaner, and the protocol is more straightforward than X11's complexity. Finally, let's talk about enterprise and professional users. This is where Wayland adoption is most conservative, and for good reason. Enterprise environments have specific requirements: legacy software compatibility, remote desktop solutions, specialized hardware support, and workflow stability. Wayland challenges all of these in different ways. Legacy software is the biggest concern. Many enterprise applications were built for X11 and haven't been updated. CAD software, scientific applications, specialized industry tools, these often have issues on Wayland or require XWayland Compatibility mode. Remote desktop is another challenge. X11's network transparency made remote access straightforward. Wayland requires different solutions: VNC servers, RDP implementations, or tools like Waypipe for remote application access. These work, but they're different from what IT departments are used to. Color management was a major blocker until 2025. Professional workflows that require accurate color reproduction couldn't compromise on this. Now that Wayland has proper color management support, this barrier is largely removed. My recommendation for enterprise users is extensive testing before migration. Set up pilot programs with non-critical systems. Test all critical applications. Validate remote access workflows. Plan for user training on new tools and workflows. The timeline for enterprise Wayland adoption will be longer than consumer adoption, and that's appropriate. But start planning now, because the industry momentum is clear. Before we dive into what works and what doesn't, we need to talk about XWayland, the unsung hero of the Wayland transition. Without XWayland, the Wayland adoption we're seeing today simply wouldn't be possible. XWayland is essentially an X11 server that runs as a Wayland client. When you run an X11 application on Wayland, XWayland creates a virtual X11 environment for that application, then translates everything to Wayland protocols. It's brilliant engineering that makes the transition gradual instead of disruptive. Here's what's really clever about this approach. Most users don't even know when they're using XWayland. You can have native Wayland applications and XWayland applications running side by side, and they integrate seamlessly. The window management, copy-paste, drag and drop, it all just works. Performance-wise, XWayland is remarkably good. In most cases, you won't notice a difference between an XWayland application and the same application running on native X11. There's some overhead, but it's minimal for typical desktop applications. But XWayland isn't perfect, and it's important to understand its limitations. Some X11 features don't translate well to Wayland's security model. Screen recording applications might have issues. Some specialized input handling doesn't work properly, and there are security considerations. XWayland applications can potentially interfere with each other in ways that native Wayland applications can't. Speaking of security, there were 8 new security vulnerabilities reported in XWayland in Q1 2025 alone. This highlights why the long-term goal is native Wayland support, not permanent XWayland compatibility. The key thing to understand is that XWayland is a bridge technology. It's incredibly valuable for the transition period, but the end goal is native Wayland applications. As more software adds native Wayland support, the reliance on XWayland decreases. Now let's be honest about what still doesn't work properly on Wayland. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There are real limitations you need to know about. Screen recording is still the biggest pain point. Wayland's security model prevents applications from capturing the screen without explicit permission. This breaks many traditional screen recording tools. OBS Studio works, but requires specific setup. Peek doesn't work at all on Wayland. Many browser-based screen sharing solutions have issues. The solution involves desktop portals, a standardized way for applications to request screen access. But not all applications have been updated to use portals, and the user experience isn't always smooth. You might get permission dialogues where you didn't before, or applications might fail silently. Specific applications still have problems. KiCad, the popular PCB design software, officially states that it runs on Wayland systems, but with significant limitations and known issues that substantially degrade the user experience. DisplayCal, used for monitor calibration, can't function properly because there's no portal for colorimeter access yet. Some workflow tools that power users rely on simply don't exist in Wayland equivalents yet. Window automation tools, some system monitoring applications, and specialized input handling software may not work properly. Hardware compatibility can still be an issue. Older NVIDIA cards, some specialized graphics hardware, and certain input devices might have problems. The hardware support is much better than it was a few years ago, but it's not universal. Network transparency, X11's ability to run applications remotely and display them locally doesn't exist in Wayland by design. There are alternatives like Waypipe, but they're not drop-in replacements for X11 forwarding. Let's look at the current state of application support, because this is where the real progress has been made. Native Wayland support is now the norm for major applications. All GNOME applications are Wayland native. Most KDE applications support Wayland. Firefox has excellent Wayland support when enabled. Chrome and Chromium work well on Wayland. LibreOffice, GIMP, Blender, and most other major open source applications have native support. The gaming ecosystem is more complex. Steam itself runs through XWayland, but that's fine for the launcher. Native Linux games increasingly support Wayland directly. Windows games through Proton use XWayland, but as I mentioned earlier, Wine 10.0's native Wayland support is changing this. Commercial applications are the laggards. Adobe Creative Suite doesn't run on Linux anyway, so that's not a Wayland-specific issue. But other commercial software, CAD applications, specialized industry tools, legacy enterprise software, these are often the last to add Wayland support. The trend is clear though. New applications are being built with Wayland support from the start. Existing applications are adding Wayland support in updates. The ecosystem momentum is strongly toward native Wayland support. Here's how you can check what's using XWayland on your system. Run XLS clients in a terminal. This lists all applications currently using XWayland. It's a great way to see how much of your workflow depends on X11 compatibility. The bottom line on compatibility is this. Most users can switch to Wayland today and have a better experience, but if your workflow depends on specific applications or tools that don't work properly on Wayland, you'll need to wait or find alternatives. Alright, here's the practical stuff. If you're thinking about switching to Wayland, don't just jump in blindly. Let me walk you through my testing methodology, the same process I use when evaluating Wayland for any system. First, hardware compatibility check. If you're on AMD or Intel graphics, you're probably fine. If you're on NVIDIA, check your driver version. You want version 495 or newer for decent Wayland support. Older NVIDIA cards or drivers might have issues. Here's how to check. Run NVIDIA SME if you have NVIDIA, or LSPCI Grec VGA for any graphics card. For NVIDIA users, also check if kernel mode setting is enabled with cat/sys/module/NVIDIA DRM parameters mode set. If it shows N, you'll need to enable it by adding NVIDIA DRM.modeset equals 1 to your kernel parameters. Next, application audit. Make a list of your critical applications, the ones you absolutely cannot live without. We're going to test these specifically on Wayland before making any permanent changes. For each critical application, we'll check 3 things. Does it start properly? Does it function correctly? Does it perform well? Don't assume anything. Test everything that matters to your workflow. Finally, backup strategy. Before making any changes, Back up your current configuration. This includes your window manager config, display settings, and any custom scripts or automation you rely on. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later if you need to roll back. Here's the beauty of modern Linux distributions. You don't have to choose between X11 and Wayland permanently. Most distributions let you switch between them at the login screen. Let me show you how this works. When you log out, you'll see a gear icon or session selector at the login screen. Click it and you'll see options like GNOME, which is Wayland, and GNOME on Xorg, which is X11. You can switch back and forth as much as you want. This is your safety net. If something doesn't work on Wayland, you can always log out and switch back to X11. No permanent changes, no risk of breaking your system. Now, here's how to test properly. Start with a Wayland session and use your computer normally for at least a few days. Don't just test for 5 minutes. You need to encounter your real workflows, edge cases, and daily usage patterns. While you're testing, here's how to check what's using XWayland versus native Wayland. Open a terminal and run XLS clients. This shows all applications currently running through XWayland. The fewer applications in this list, the more native your Wayland experience is. For a more visual approach, install and run Xeyes. This is a fun little application that shows eyes that follow your mouse cursor. Here's the trick. The eyes only move when your cursor is over XWayland windows. If the eyes stop moving when you hover over a window, that application is running natively on Wayland. You can also check individual applications by running them with debug output. Try Wayland debug equals 1 Firefox, for example. If you see lots of Wayland protocol messages, the application is using Wayland natively. If you see very little output, it's probably using XWayland. Performance testing is important too. If you're a gamer, test your games on both X11 and Wayland. If you do video editing or other performance-critical work, benchmark both environments with your actual workloads. Let's go through the most common issues you might encounter and how to solve them. I've collected these from community reports and my own testing throughout 2025. Problem: Wayland session won't start or immediately falls back to X11. This is usually a driver or configuration issue. For NVIDIA users, make sure kernel mode setting is enabled. Edit etc/default/grub and add NVIDIA drm.modeset equals 1 to grub camdeline Linux default. Then run sudo update grub and reboot. For other graphics cards, check that you have the necessary Wayland packages installed. On Ubuntu, that's Ubuntu Session Wayland. On Fedora, it should be installed by default. On Arch, you might need Plasma Wayland Session for KDE, or similar packages for other desktop environments. Problem: applications crash or won't start on Wayland. First, try forcing the application to use XWayland mode. For GTK applications, use GTK backend equals X11 application name. For Qt applications, use Qt QPA platform equals XCB application name. This forces them to use X11 compatibility mode. If that works, the application has Wayland compatibility issues. Check if there's a newer version available, or look for Wayland-specific configuration options. Problem: blurry or incorrectly scaled applications. This is usually an XWayland scaling issue. You can set scaling for XWayland applications using xrender-output XWayland 0 -scale 1.25 × 1.25. Adjust the scale factor as needed. For Qt applications specifically, try setting Qt_scale factor equals 1.25 and Qt auto screen scale factor equals 1 in your environment. For GTK applications, use GDK scale equals 1.25 and GDK DPI scale equals 0.8. Problem: poor gaming performance on Wayland. First, try using GameScope. GameScope-W1920-H-1080-F-Steam. This can significantly improve gaming performance and compatibility. For competitive gaming where input latency matters, enable tearing in your compositor settings. In KDE, go to System Settings, Display, and enable Allow Tearing. In Sway, add Allow Tearing Yes to your config. Problem: screen recording doesn't work. Install the appropriate desktop portal for your compositor. For GNOME, that's XDG Desktop Portal GNOME. For WL roots-based compositors like Sway, install XDG Desktop Portal WLR. For OBS Studio, use the Flatpak version if possible. It often has better Wayland integration. Enable Wayland support in OBS settings and select Pipewire as your capture method. Problem: keyboard shortcuts don't work in games or VNs. This is due to Wayland's security model. For games, try running them through GameScope, or use your compositor's shortcut inhibition settings. For VMs, you might need to use your compositor's focus follows mouse mode or specific VN integration tools. Here's my recommended migration approach. Don't try to switch everything at once. That's a recipe for frustration. Phase 1. Testing. Spend at least a week using Wayland for your normal workflows while keeping X11 available as a fallback. Document any issues you encounter. Phase 2. Tool replacement. Identify X11-specific tools in your workflow and find Wayland alternatives. Replace Xclip with WLCopy. Learn your compositor's window management features instead of relying on Xkill, and so on. Phase 3. Configuration migration. If you're switching window managers, like going from i3 to XWay, migrate your configuration gradually. Don't try to replicate everything at once. Start with basic functionality and add complexity over time. Keep documentation of your changes. When something breaks, you'll want to know what you changed and how to revert it. Use version control for your configuration files if possible. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. The Wayland transition involves learning new tools and workflows. It's normal for productivity to dip initially while you adapt. Let's zoom out and talk about why this transition is so significant. We're not just switching display servers. We're witnessing the biggest architectural change in Linux desktop computing in decades. X11 has been carrying 40 years of technical debt. Every modern feature, compositing, multi-monitor support, high DPI displays, touch input, has been bolted onto a system that was never designed for these use cases. It's like trying to run a modern web application on a 1980s mainframe terminal protocol. This technical debt has real consequences. It limits innovation, makes the desktop less secure, and creates complexity that makes Linux harder to develop for and maintain. Wayland isn't just fixing these problems. It's preventing them from happening again by designing for modern computing from the ground up. The security implications alone are huge. In a world where we're increasingly concerned about application isolation, data privacy, and secure computing, X11's any application can do anything model is fundamentally incompatible with modern security requirements. So what's next for Wayland? The remaining challenges are well defined and actively being worked on. Screen recording standardization is the big one. The desktop portal approach is working, but it needs broader application adoption and better user experience. Expect this to be largely solved by 2026. Legacy application support will continue to improve through XWayland, but the long-term goal is native Wayland support. As more applications add native support, XWayland becomes less critical. New features that are only possible with Wayland's architecture are starting to emerge. Better multi-GPU support, more sophisticated input handling, improved accessibility features, and integration with emerging technologies like AR/VR displays. The timeline for X11 deprecation varies by distribution, but the writing is on the wall. I expect most major distributions to drop X11 as the default by 2026, with X11 support maintained for legacy compatibility for several more years. This transition reminds me of other major shifts in computing: the move from command line to GUI, from single tasking to multitasking operating systems, from dial-up to broadband internet. These transitions are always messy in the middle, but they're necessary for progress. What's different about the Wayland transition is how gradual it's been. Unlike some technology shifts that happen overnight, the Linux community has taken a decade to get this right. XWayland has made the transition smooth enough that many users don't even realize they've switched. This careful approach has paid off. Instead of a disruptive change that breaks everything, we have a transition that preserves compatibility while enabling innovation. It's actually a model for how major technology transitions should be handled. The broader impact goes beyond just Linux desktop users. Wayland's success validates the approach of building modern, secure, efficient systems from the ground up, rather than endlessly patching legacy systems. This has implications for other areas of computing where we're dealing with similar technical debt. Alright, let's get practical. Should you switch to Wayland? Here's my decision framework. Try Wayland if you have modern hardware, especially AMD or Intel graphics. You use standard desktop applications. You want the latest features like HDR and proper fractional scaling, or you're setting up a new system. The benefits are immediate and the risks are low. Stick with X11 for now, if you rely on legacy applications that don't work properly on Wayland. You have older NVIDIA hardware with driver issues. You have mission-critical workflows that can't tolerate any disruption, or you're in an enterprise environment that hasn't validated Wayland compatibility. Test both if you're a gamer. Performance can vary by game and hardware. You're a developer or power user with complex workflows. you use specialized hardware or software, or you're just curious about the differences. The key is that this isn't a permanent decision. You can switch back and forth as much as you want while you evaluate both options. Here's my step-by-step testing checklist. First, verify your hardware compatibility. Check your graphics drivers and enable NVIDIA kernel mode setting if needed. Second, back up your current configuration. This includes window manager configs, display settings, and any custom scripts. Third, switch to a Wayland session and use it for at least a week of normal work. Don't just test for an hour. You need to encounter your real workflows. Fourth, test all your critical applications. Check that they start, function correctly, and perform well. Use XLS clients and XAs to see what's using XWayland. Fifth, evaluate performance. If you're a gamer, test your games. If you do creative work, test your creative applications. Compare both subjective feel and objective measurements. Finally, document your experience. What works better? What works worse? What would you need to change in your workflow? This documentation will help you make an informed decision. If you run into issues, the Linux community has excellent resources for Wayland support. The ArchWiki has comprehensive Wayland documentation that applies to all distributions. The Fedora documentation includes detailed troubleshooting guides. For compositor-specific help, check the KDE and GNOME community forums, the Sway subreddit, or the Hyperland Discord. The broader Linux communities on Reddit, r/Linux, r/Linux questions, r/KDE, GNOME, are also great resources. Don't forget about your distribution's official support channels. Most major distributions have dedicated Wayland documentation and support forums. Let me wrap this up with the key takeaways from our deep dive into Wayland in 2025. First, Wayland is finally ready for most users. The combination of mature desktop environments, broad application support, and solved hardware compatibility issues means the barriers to adoption are lower than they've ever been. Second, the transition is gradual, not disruptive. XWayland provides excellent compatibility for applications that haven't been updated yet. You can switch back and forth between X11 and Wayland as much as you want while you evaluate both. Third, the benefits are real and measurable. Better performance, improved security, modern features like HDR and fractional scaling, and a foundation for future innovation. These aren't theoretical benefits. They're things you can experience today. Fourth, there are still limitations to be aware of. Screen recording, some legacy applications, and certain specialized workflows may have issues, but these limitations are shrinking rapidly as the ecosystem matures. Finally, this transition represents the future of Linux desktop computing. X11 has served us well for 40 years, but it's time to move forward. Wayland provides a modern, secure, efficient foundation for the next 40 years of Linux desktop innovation. Here's what I want you to do. Try Wayland this week. Use the testing methodology I've outlined in this video. Spend at least a few days with it. Test your critical applications and see how it feels. Then come back and let me know your experience in the comments. What worked well? What didn't work? What questions do you have? Your feedback helps me create better content and helps other viewers learn from your experience. If you found this deep dive valuable, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm planning more comprehensive guides like this one, covering topics like Linux gaming, development environments, and system administration. The future of Linux desktop is here, and it's looking pretty smooth. The Wayland transition represents more than just a technical upgrade. It's the Linux community at its best, taking the time to build something better rather than just patching what we have. Whether you switch today or wait another year, Wayland is where we're all heading. The question isn't if, but when. And for many of you, that when might be sooner than you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.